One day before my son's wedding, his fiancée whispered something in my ear that shattered my world. "Starting tomorrow, you'll no longer be part of this family. You won't be welcome anymore." Something inside me broke completely. I decided to stay home, devastated and heartbroken. What I didn't realize was that hours later, their wedding would crumble entirely for a reason no one could have anticipated. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. From tomorrow onward, you're nothing but ancient history to this family. Those were the exact words whispered to me by my son's bride-to-be on the eve of their wedding ceremony, while other guests chatted cheerfully in the background. Her smile never wavered for even a second, but her eyes were cold as winter ice. I stood there paralyzed. The gift I had brought, a memory album I'd spent months preparing, hung from my trembling hands like dead weight. In that moment, something fundamental within me shattered. After 2 decades of raising my son Michael as a single parent, making every sacrifice imaginable, this woman was telling me with complete composure that I no longer had a place in his life. My name is David, and for 25 years I was both mother and father to Michael. When my wife left us, Michael was barely 5 years old, still clutching that stuffed elephant he wouldn't let go of even while sleeping. I remember that first night alone when he asked me with those enormous eyes, "Dad, when is Mom coming back?" And I, swallowing my tears, simply smiled and said that sometimes people need to follow different paths. From then on, it was years of waking up at 5 a.m. to prepare him for school, before rushing to my first shift at the clinic where I worked as a receptionist. Then I'd go to my second job at a department store until late at night. Many times I arrived home so exhausted I could barely remove my shoes before falling asleep. But I always reserved energy to listen to how his day went, to help with homework, to be his personal cheerleader at school soccer games. I saved every penny possible. I gave up new clothes, cut my own hair, sold the car to pay for university tuition when scholarships weren't enough. When Michael graduated law school, I felt I had fulfilled the silent promise I made to that frightened little boy. He would have every opportunity possible no matter what I needed to sacrifice. So when he introduced me to Rebecca 3 years ago, I really tried to like her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and eloquent, everything I never was. She worked at a prestigious advertising agency and was always impeccably dressed. Michael seemed enchanted. His eyes lit up when she entered a room, and I just wanted to see him happy. But there was something about Rebecca that unsettled me from the beginning. The way her smile disappeared when Michael turned his back, how she spoke to me with that condescending tone, as if she were doing me an immense favor just by acknowledging my existence. At family gatherings, she monopolized attention talking about international trips and famous clients, rarely showing interest in my life or Michael's childhood stories. "Oh, how sweet," she'd say when I mentioned something from the past, as if she were talking to a child. At Michael's 30th birthday, I prepared the chocolate raspberry cake I'd always made him since he was 12. It was our tradition. When I arrived with it at the party, Rebecca took the plate from my hands with a tense smile. "Michael is following a low-carb diet now, David, but thanks for the effort." The cake remained untouched in the kitchen while Michael, unknowingly, ate the gourmet canapés she had ordered. I swallowed my wounded pride, as I always did. It was just her way, I thought. She comes from another world, doesn't understand our simple traditions. Deep down, I hoped that with time we'd grow closer, that she'd see me as family. The engagement came quickly, barely a year after they started dating. Michael was radiant when he told me he'd proposed during an elegant dinner at a seaside restaurant. I forced a smile and hugged him tight, telling him how happy I was for him while fighting against a sense of loss I couldn't explain. The wedding preparations excluded me completely. I wasn't called for menu tastings, cake selection, florist visits, or any other decisions. When I subtly asked if I could help, Rebecca responded, "Don't worry about anything, David. We've already hired the best professionals. You just need to show up well-dressed on the day." And so it went until the wedding eve, when I decided to make one last effort to build a bridge. I prepared an album full of photos and memories from Michael's life, from his first steps to his law school graduation. Each page told a story of love and perseverance, every photo carefully chosen to show the wonderful man my son had become. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner with the album wrapped in silver gift paper. Rebecca intercepted me at the entrance, her white rehearsal dress shining under the soft lights. "David," she said with a superficial smile. "You came?" "Of course I came," I replied, extending the package. "I made this for you both. I thought maybe you could look through it together tonight, before the big day." That's when she leaned in, her expensive perfume invading my space, and whispered those words that would mark me forever. "Starting tomorrow, you're nothing but ancient history to this family. You've done your part. You raised Michael. Now he's my husband, my family, and you're just extra baggage. Don't embarrass us by clinging to him." I stood paralyzed, incredulous. Before I could respond, she continued, "Actually, maybe it would be better if you don't even show up tomorrow. Save us the drama, David. It's not like anyone really expects you to be there. I don't remember how I got out of there. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the navy blue suit I'd bought especially for the wedding, while silent tears ran down my face. That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. For the first time in Michael's life, I wouldn't be there for him. I wouldn't show up at the wedding. And that decision, which seemed like my final surrender, would end up being the catalyst for a devastating truth that no one was prepared to face. The wedding morning dawned with clear blue skies, the perfect kind of day every bride dreams of for their special moment. I woke before the alarm, years of early morning routine engraved in my body like an internal clock. For an instant, I moved automatically. I made coffee, took the suit off the hanger, set aside the shoes I'd bought especially for the occasion, simple but elegant, the kind a proud father would wear to his son's wedding. Then Rebecca's words came back like a punch to the stomach. "You're just extra baggage." I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling around the coffee cup, while the morning sun drew patterns on the tile floor I'd installed myself years ago when I didn't have money to hire a professional. My phone started vibrating incessantly. Messages from relatives and friends all on their way to the church, all asking where I was. I ignored every one of them. After an hour, the first call from Michael came. I let it go to voicemail, unable to hear his voice without falling apart. His voicemail sounded worried, confused. "Dad, where are you? Everyone's waiting for you. Please call me." It was the first time in 25 years I'd deliberately disappointed him. The pain was almost physical, as if I were tearing something vital inside myself. But Rebecca's words had opened a wound I'd been ignoring for too long. For years, I'd put Michael's needs above my own. I'd suffocated my feelings, swallowed veiled insults and condescending treatment, all in the name of love for my son. But that morning, something different stirred within me. A voice saying, "You deserve respect too. You deserve dignity too." For the first time, I was choosing myself instead of my son. At 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was my sister Louise, still dressed for the wedding, her face a mixture of concern and irritation. "David, what the hell are you doing? Everyone's looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour." I gestured for her to come in, unable to speak without tears escaping. We sat in the living room, the navy suit still hanging on the closet door like a ghost of what should be. "I'm not going," I finally managed to say. Louise looked at me as if I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. "What do you mean you're not going? It's your only son's wedding." Rebecca told me that after the wedding, I'm no longer part of his family. She told me it would be better if I didn't even show up today. My sister paled, indignation replacing the confusion on her face. "She said that? She looked you in the eye and said that?" I nodded, tears finally winning the battle against my self-control. "She said I'm extra baggage, that I've done my part, and now I should exit stage left." Louise sat heavily beside me, taking my hands in hers. For a long moment, only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. "Oh, David," she whispered finally, her voice choked. "I always knew there was something wrong with that girl. She loves him in her own way." I tried to defend one last spark of hope for Michael's future. "No." Louise shook her head firmly. Love doesn't treat people like that. Love doesn't exclude. Love doesn't humiliate. While we talked, my phone kept vibrating with messages and calls. Michael, increasingly desperate. Confused friends. Rebecca's family, curiously in complete silence. At 11 o'clock, the church bells began to ring in the distance. I imagined the guests taking their seats. Michael nervous at the altar. Rebecca preparing in some side room of the church, probably satisfied with my absence. This should be the beginning of the end of my story as a central part of Michael's life, a step into the shadows, to the role of a distant figure who would be tolerated on holidays and birthdays, always kept on the sidelines. But fate had other plans. Shortly after noon, when the bells should have been announcing the union of the new couple, my phone rang again. It was Louise, who had reluctantly returned to the church at my request. Her voice trembled so much I could barely understand her words. "David," she whispered as if afraid of being heard. "The wedding didn't happen." My heart stopped. "What do you mean it didn't happen?" "Michael found out." "God, David, it's so terrible. He discovered everything about Rebecca moments before the ceremony. The floor seemed to disappear beneath my feet. Found out that she was cheating on him with her boss for months. And there's more, much more. Her family is bankrupt, David. They needed Michael's money to save themselves. The prenup she insisted on so much, it was a trap to funnel his future earnings to her family's accounts. The world spun around me as the pieces fell into place. Rebecca's occasional comments about Michael's future salary, her insistence on controlling all financial aspects of their relationship, the way her father had told me with an enigmatic smile during the engagement. "Your struggle is over, David. Now it's our turn to take care of Michael." It wasn't love. It was never love. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to use my son, to exploit everything he'd worked so hard to achieve, everything we'd achieved together. "How is Michael?" was all I could ask, my voice almost unrecognizable to my own ears. There was a long pause filled only by Louise's irregular breathing. "Devastated," she finally responded, "but also determined. You should have seen him, David. When he confronted Rebecca in front of everyone, he was different, like he'd finally awakened from a long dream." When I hung up the phone, I sat motionless for several minutes, trying to process everything. The wedding that didn't happen, the betrayal, the financial scheme, and in the midst of it all, the absence that should have destroyed me, mine, ended up being the only thing that saved me from witnessing my son's public humiliation. Maybe, I thought with bitter irony, I should thank Rebecca for pushing me away on precisely this day. The following hours passed like a feverish blur. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, each new tone bringing more details about the disaster that had unfolded at the church. Guests leaving in shock, Rebecca's family trying to control the damage, inventing stories, blaming Michael for abandoning her at the altar, and at the center of the storm, my son, with whom I still hadn't managed to speak directly. Around 3 p.m., a strong knock at the door made me jump. I opened it to find Michael standing there, still wearing his wedding suit, his tie undone and his eyes red. Without saying a word, he entered and hugged me so tightly it almost took my breath away. "Dad," he whispered against my hair. "Did you know?" I felt my heart contract. "Know what, son?" "About Rebecca, about who she really is." I pulled away gently, looking into his eyes. I knew she didn't want me around. I knew she didn't respect me. But no, Michael. I didn't know about the betrayal or about her family's financial plans. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "She told you not to come to the wedding, didn't she? That's why you weren't there." I couldn't lie to him. I never could. "The night before, she told me that after the wedding I'd no longer be part of your family. She said it would be better if I didn't even show up." His face darkened, a new wave of pain and rage passing through his features. "And you believed her? You believed I would allow that?" That question hit me like lightning. Had I, after all those years raising him, after knowing his heart better than anyone, really believed he would let me be pushed out of his life? The truth hurt. Yes, I had believed it. Not because I didn't trust Michael, but because I'd seen the power Rebecca exercised over him, the way he seemed blind when it came to her. Michael, she transformed you into someone else when she was around, someone I sometimes barely recognized. He collapsed on the couch, covering his face with his hands. I know, he murmured through his fingers. I know. I sat beside him, gently placing my hand on his shoulder. What happened at the church? I want to hear it from you. Michael took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. Robert, my best man, received photos of Rebecca with her boss Carlos. Recent photos from 2 weeks ago. They were, well, it was clear what was happening. He swallowed hard. Robert showed them to me minutes before the ceremony was supposed to begin. At first I didn't believe it. I thought it was some misunderstanding or old photos from before we met. But they weren't. No, I completed gently. The date was there in the corner of the photos, and she was wearing the bracelet I gave her on our last dating anniversary. His voice broke. I confronted her in the preparation room. First she denied everything. Then she said it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. But then her cousin Mariana, who was drunk on champagne and nerves, let slip something about the prenup, about how Rebecca's father had celebrated the night before that their financial problems would be solved after tomorrow. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the betrayal my son had suffered. It wasn't just infidelity. It was an elaborate trap, a web of lies woven by people who were supposed to love him. That's when I realized, Michael continued, his voice gaining firmness, that it was never about me. It was about what I could provide. My future salary, my career, my contacts, all part of a plan. And what did you do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A sad smile crossed his lips. I walked to the altar, not to get married, but to announce to all the guests that the wedding was canceled, that Rebecca had betrayed my trust, and that our relationship was over. I imagined the scene. My son, always so reserved and discreet, standing in front of 200 guests, exposing his pain and disappointment. The courage that must have required left me speechless. Her family went crazy, he continued. Rebecca's father threatened me right there in front of everyone, said I didn't know who I was messing with. Her mother started screaming that I was humiliating her daughter and Rebecca. He paused, the pain clear in his voice. Rebecca completely transformed. All that charm, all that sweetness disappeared. She called me a coward, said I was overreacting, that everyone cheats, that I was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to me. I took his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. I'm so sorry, son. He squeezed my hand back, his eyes meeting mine. You know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even discovering the financial scheme. It was realizing that she wanted to push you away from me, that she treated you like something disposable. His voice broke. You who gave everything for me, who never once abandoned me. The tears I'd been holding back since he arrived finally overflowed. Oh, Michael. And today, when you weren't there, at first I was furious. I thought you had abandoned me just when I needed you most. But now I understand. She forced you into that. She made you believe it's what I wanted. I should never have believed her, I admitted, guilt consuming me. I should have been there for you, no matter what she said. Michael shook his head firmly. No, Dad. Maybe it was better this way. You didn't have to witness that circus. And somehow, strangely, your absence made me see more clearly. When I realized that you, the most reliable, most constant person in my life when it weren't there, it was like something clicked inside me. I started questioning everything. A long silence settled between us, filled only by the distant sound of birds in the garden and the occasional ring of my phone, which we now ignored completely. What happens now? I asked finally. Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when thinking deeply. I'm not sure. I have to deal with the practical side, cancel the honeymoon, return gifts, and I imagine Rebecca's family won't give up easily. Her father has connections and apparently is desperate for money. We'll face it together, I affirmed, feeling a new determination grow within me, whatever it is. Michael smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen on his face in months. Together, he nodded, squeezing my hand. That night, while Michael slept in the room I'd kept intact for him all these years, I sat on the back porch looking at the stars. The pain for what my son was going through was real and deep, but there was also, secretly, a small feeling of relief, as if we'd narrowly escaped something much worse than a canceled wedding. Years of manipulation, isolation, financial and emotional abuse. What I didn't know then was that the story was far from over. In fact, the events of that day would be just the prelude to an even greater battle. A battle that would test not only our resilience but also our dignity, our truth. The week following the non-wedding, as I began calling it in my mind, the storm I feared finally arrived. It started as whispers, small shockwaves that spread through our relatively small community. Then, almost overnight, it transformed into a tsunami. Rebecca's version of events began circulating on social media. An abandoned bride, devastated by an insecure groom who succumbed to the manipulations of a possessive father. She posted a photo of herself in the wedding dress with artistically smudged makeup, with the caption, "Some people don't know when to step back. Some fathers can't cut the umbilical cord." Comments flooded her page, strangers offering support, friends demanding to know what kind of man abandons a woman at the altar, and what kind of father interferes in his adult son's relationship. Her narrative was convincing, emotional, and completely fabricated. "Ignore it," I advised Michael when he showed me the posts, his face pale with rage. "The people who matter know the truth." But soon we discovered it wasn't that simple. Lies have long legs, as my grandmother used to say, and Rebecca's were running a marathon. I started noticing strange looks at the supermarket, conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached at the pharmacy. An old school friend sent me a message asking if I had really ruined Michael's wedding out of jealousy. Even the priest from our parish, who had known me since Michael was a child, called for a private conversation about letting children follow their own path. The indignation I felt was quickly replaced by something more painful: shame. Not because I believed the lies, but because after all those years of silent sacrifice, of dignity maintained even in the most difficult circumstances, I was being portrayed as the villain in someone else's story. Michael, meanwhile, was facing his own battles. One of the partners at the law firm where he worked, coincidentally a friend of Rebecca's father, began questioning his judgment and emotional stability. Clients he'd worked so hard to gain were suddenly reluctant to work with him. Then on a cloudy Thursday morning, about 10 days after the canceled wedding, the final bomb dropped. An official letter delivered by a serious-faced messenger, addressed to me. I opened the envelope with trembling hands to find a legal notification. Rebecca's family was suing me for defamation, emotional damages, and most absurdly, interference with contractual relationships. I immediately called my friend Clara, who worked as a legal assistant at a major law firm in the city. She came directly to my house after her shift, her face grave as she read the document. "This is pure intimidation, David," she said finally, placing the papers on the kitchen table. "They're trying to scare you. This interference with contractual relationships is just a fancy way of saying you ruined their financial plan." Financial plan? Clara looked at me with surprise. "Didn't you know? Rebecca's family is practically bankrupt. Her father lost millions in bad investments over the past few years. They were counting on the wedding to stabilize their finances." That information fell like a stone in my stomach. So it had never been about love, not even for an instant. It was about money, control, financial security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, a small act of self-preservation after years of submission, I gave Rebecca the perfect opportunity to change the narrative. She couldn't be seen as the unfaithful and opportunistic bride, so she painted me as the bitter and controlling father who couldn't let go of his son. It was brilliant, in a perverse way. The next day, Michael received a similar letter. He came home pale, throwing the papers on the table. "They're threatening to sue me, too. Rebecca's father said if I don't publicly clear her name, he'll drag you through the courts. He said he'll ruin you financially." My heart raced. Michael had just graduated from law school. He was still paying student loans, and his career was barely beginning. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could drain him before he had the chance to establish himself professionally. "What are you going to do?" I asked, fearing the answer. Michael clenched his fists, a fierce determination in his eyes that reminded me of the boy who was, the kid who faced bullies twice his size to defend a disabled classmate. "I'm going to fight, Dad. I'm going to fight for both of us." That night, while I couldn't sleep, I remembered something Rebecca had said months before, during one of her condescending moments. "You don't understand how the world works, David. Perception is everything. People believe what they see, not what's true." She was right in one aspect. Perception mattered. People believed her because she played the victim role well. If perception was her weapon, then we needed to fight with truth. Not in whispers, not politely behind the scenes, but openly, publicly. And I had exactly the ammunition we needed. The next day, I rummaged through my small home office, finding every piece of evidence I'd saved almost instinctively over the years. Emails that Michael had forwarded to me where Rebecca talked about her financial expectations for their future. Photos of text messages he'd shown me where she questioned why he insisted on considering pro bono work when he could be making real money. And most importantly, a copy of the prenup that Michael had asked me to review, with clauses so clearly predatory that any judge would see the intention behind them. When Michael came home from work, I spread everything on the living room table. "Look," I said, pointing to the papers. "We have our own weapon, the truth." He examined the documents, nodding slowly. "Yes, we have evidence, but how do we use it against them? If we go public, it'll just look like retaliation and feed their narrative that we're vindictive and bitter." I considered his words. He was right. We needed to be strategic. "You're right. We can't just throw this on social media. We need professional help." It was Clara who gave us the answer when we consulted her the next day. "I know an investigative journalist," she said. "Paulo Mendez. He specializes in exposing financial fraud and corporate schemes. If you have concrete evidence, he can turn this into a legitimate news story, not social media gossip." The idea was perfect. An investigative news report would have credibility that our individual statements never would. And more importantly, it would shift the narrative focus from family drama to financial fraud, where it really belonged. Paulo met us at a discreet cafe downtown, a short man with a gray beard and penetrating eyes that seemed to examine every word we said. He listened to our story in silence, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "What you have is strong," he said finally, "especially the prenup and the financial records of the Ramirez family. But I need more. I need independent confirmation." Over the next 2 weeks, Paulo worked tirelessly investigating the financial history of Rebecca's family, interviewing former employees of their bankrupt companies, even getting an anonymous statement from one of the bank employees who dealt with their problematic accounts. Meanwhile, Rebecca's campaign against us intensified. She gave a tearful interview to a local magazine detailing how I had poisoned Michael against her for years, how I couldn't accept another woman in his life. Her family began making calls to Michael's business contacts, insinuating that he was emotionally unstable and unreliable for important legal matters. The pressure was almost unbearable. Michael came home increasingly exhausted, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. I myself could barely leave the house without feeling the stares, the whispers, the silent judgment of neighbors I'd known for decades. Then, exactly 1 month after the canceled wedding, Paulo's report was published. Behind the canceled wedding, the financial schemes of the Ramirez family. The report occupied 2 full pages in the region's most respected newspaper, with an even more detailed online version. It was devastating in its clinical precision. It detailed the successive bankruptcies of Mr. Ramirez's companies, the unpaid loans, the previous fraud accusations that had been quietly settled out of court. It included legal analysis of the prenup by independent lawyers, classifying it as predatory and ethically questionable. And yes, it mentioned the extramarital affair that had been the trigger for the wedding cancellation, with blurred but recognizable photos of Rebecca with her boss at an elegant restaurant, clearly in a romantic situation. The reaction was immediate. Online comments flooded in, not against me or Michael, but against Rebecca and her family. So she wanted his money, not his heart. That poor father. Imagine being treated like that after raising your son alone. The Ramirez are gold diggers, pure and simple. The tide had turned. Truth, exposed to the light of day, was doing what our words alone could never accomplish. That night, Michael and I sat on the house's porch, drinking tea in silence. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, just shared exhaustion and perhaps a small thread of hope. "Do you think it's over?" I asked finally. Michael looked at the stars for a long moment before responding. "I don't know. Her family is cornered now, and desperate people do desperate things." He turned to me, his eyes clearer than they'd been in months. "But at least now we're fighting with equal weapons, truth against their lies." I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. The battle might not be over, but now we had a real chance to win. And most importantly, we had each other. The bond that Rebecca had tried so hard to break was stronger than ever. What I didn't know then, as we sat peacefully on the porch that night, was that the Ramirez still had one last move planned. A move so bold, so reckless, that no one could have predicted it, and that would change our lives forever. The calm that followed Paulo's report publication was like the eye of a hurricane, a brief moment of peace before the next wave of chaos. For 2 weeks, Michael and I breathed a little easier. The judgmental stares diminished. Support messages began arriving. Even some clients who had distanced themselves from Michael's firm returned, admitting they'd been misinformed about the situation. I should have suspected that silence coming from the Ramirez family. People like them don't disappear quietly when exposed. They counterattack, usually in ways you could never anticipate. The retaliation came on an ordinary Wednesday when Michael was in court defending a case and I was grocery shopping. My phone rang, an unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mr. David Oliveira?" A male voice, formal, asked. "Yes, that's me. This is Detective Martinez from the Civil Police. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible to give a statement." My heart froze. A statement about what exactly? There was a pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. "We have a formal accusation against you for extortion, blackmail, and threats against the Ramirez family." The grocery bag slipped from my hands, oranges rolling down the supermarket aisle. "That's absurd, I never—" "Mr. Oliveira," the detective interrupted, his voice now softer. "I strongly advise you to come accompanied by a lawyer." I left the groceries right there and drove home in shock. My hands trembled so much I could barely open the door. Once inside, I immediately called Michael, who rushed out of court as soon as he heard my trembling voice. When he arrived home, I'd already found the document an officer had left at my door during my absence, an official summons detailing the accusations. According to the complaint, I had threatened the Ramirez family with public exposure of false information unless they paid a significant sum of money to keep me quiet. "This is completely fabricated," Michael said, his face red with rage as he read the document. "They're trying to criminalize the fact that we exposed the truth about them. But how can they just invent accusations like this?" "They don't need evidence," Michael said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "To start an investigation, not necessarily. And they probably fabricated some kind of evidence, fake emails, edited recordings, anything to give initial credibility to the accusation. And now?" My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "Now," Michael said with determination, "we fight. And this time, not just for our reputation, but for your freedom." The next morning, we presented ourselves at the police station. Michael had spent the entire night preparing our initial defense while I sat beside him at the kitchen table, providing every detail I could remember about my interactions with the Ramirez family. The police station was an old, imposing building in the city center. As we climbed the entrance steps, I noticed a small group of reporters gathering. Someone had leaked information about the accusation to the press. "Don't say anything," Michael murmured, putting a protective arm around me as we hurried past the journalists. "Not a word." Detective Martinez was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and an unreadable expression. He led us to a small interrogation room, a surreal experience for me. who had never been on the other side of the law in my entire life. "Mr. Oliveira," he began after turning on a recorder, "are you aware of the accusations made against you?" "Yes," I replied, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "And they are completely false." Michael intervened professionally. "Detective, I'd like to state for the record that my father vehemently denies all accusations and that we're prepared to cooperate fully with the investigation, confident that the truth will prevail." The interrogation lasted 2 agonizing hours. I was questioned about every interaction I'd had with Rebecca and her family, about my motivations for not attending the wedding, about what I really wanted by contributing to the journalistic report that exposed the Ramirez. I answered every question honestly, but as the interrogation progressed, I noticed something disturbing in the detective's tone. It seemed like he'd already formed an opinion, as if he was just going through protocol, not really investigating. When we finally left, Michael was tense. "He's not being impartial," he murmured as we walked to the car. "Someone got to him first." My stomach sank. "Do you think Rebecca's family has connections in the police?" "Maybe not directly," Michael responded. "But her father has enough money and influence to open doors, and desperate people don't care about ethics." In the following days, the situation worsened. The story leaked to all the local newspapers, but in a distorted way. Father accused of extorting his son's ex-fiancee's family. My name and photo were everywhere. The small beauty salon where I worked part-time called politely to say, maybe it would be better if I took leave until everything was resolved. Neighbors who had started greeting me again after Paulo's report went back to averting their eyes. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. One night, sitting at the kitchen table reviewing documents with Michael, I broke down in tears. "Maybe we should give up," I whispered. "Maybe we should just say what they want to hear, publicly retract." Michael put down the papers and took my hands. "Dad, look at me." His eyes were steady, determined. "That's exactly what they want, to break us, make us doubt the truth, make you feel so cornered you'd accept any deal to make this end. But what if they succeed? What if I get arrested for something I didn't do?" "That's not going to happen," he affirmed with a conviction I desperately wanted to share. "We have truth on our side, and now we have something else." "What?" A small smile appeared on his face. "Help. Paulo, the journalist, is furious about this attempt to criminalize the press. He's investigating Detective Martinez, looking for connections with the Ramirez. And Clara managed to get her boss, one of the city's top criminal lawyers, to take our case pro bono." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't alone in this fight. The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. Paulo published a new report, this time focused on the questionable investigation methods in the case against me. He had discovered that Detective Martinez had a son who worked for one of the few surviving companies in Mr. Ramirez's bankrupt empire. A clear conflict of interest that the detective had forgotten to mention. Simultaneously, our new lawyer, Dr. Vieira, filed a formal petition questioning the validity of the evidence presented against me, demanding that it be subjected to forensic analysis to verify its authenticity. The pressure began to mount, no longer against us, but against the Ramirez and the system they had tried to manipulate. 3 days after Dr. Vieira's petition, we received a call from him, his normally calm voice now charged with emotion. "The prosecutor's office is considering dropping the case," he said. "It seems the evidence doesn't hold up under more rigorous scrutiny, and they don't want the embarrassment of pursuing such obviously fabricated accusations." Michael and I hugged, crying with relief, but our celebration was interrupted by the rest of Dr. Vieira's information. "There's a condition, however. The Ramirez are proposing a settlement. They'll drop the criminal charges if you sign a public retraction of Paulo's report and agree to a permanent confidentiality agreement about the entire matter." I looked at Michael, feeling rage rise within me. Even now, cornered, they were still trying to silence us, to force us to deny the truth. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the strength of my conviction. "I'm not going to lie to save their reputation. I'm not going to disavow the truth." Michael nodded, a smile of pride lighting up his face. Dr. Vieira, our answer is no. Tell them we're prepared to go all the way. It was a risky bet. We were essentially challenging a powerful and desperate family to do their worst. But something had changed within me. The fear that had paralyzed me days before had been replaced by iron determination. I had spent my entire life ducking, adjusting, sacrificing my own dignity for others' comfort. No more. And then, when our challenge was transmitted to the Ramirez, something extraordinary happened. They backed down. 2 weeks later, the case was officially dismissed for insufficient evidence. Detective Martinez was removed from the case due to conflict of interest. And most surprising still, Rebecca and her family left town almost overnight, moving somewhere distant where their names and reputations weren't stained by the exposed truth. The storm had finally passed, but as we discovered in the following months, it had left both destruction and growth in its wake. It's strange how life marks us, how certain experiences are imprinted on us, changing not only who we are, but how we see the world around us. In the months that followed the case dismissal, I discovered that truth firsthand. The immediate relief gave way to something more complex, a healing process that was both liberating and painful. Perhaps the most difficult thing was accepting that even with our public vindication, some wounds wouldn't heal completely. Some neighbors remained distant. Certain friendships never fully recovered. Doubt, once planted, is a persistent seed. Michael faced his own challenges. Although his career at the law firm was finally advancing without the shadow of false accusations, the emotional trauma of Rebecca's betrayal left him cautious, reserved. He threw himself into work with an intensity that sometimes worried me, as if he could erase the memories through pure effort. You need to give yourself time, I would tell him gently on nights when I found him still hunched over legal documents at 2 a.m., his eyes red with exhaustion. Pain doesn't disappear if you ignore it. I'm fine, Dad, he would always respond with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. I just have a lot of work. But there were also moments of genuine growth between us. One night, about 6 months after all the turmoil, we were sitting on the porch, watching a summer storm approach. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and distant lightning occasionally illuminated the dark sky. You know what's strange? Michael said suddenly, breaking our comfortable silence. Now I look back and see all the signs I ignored with Rebecca. The way she talked about money, how she tried to distance me from people who really cared about me, how she reacted when I mentioned pro bono cases. It's always easier to see patterns in retrospect, I responded gently. But it's not just that. He turned to me, his eyes serious in the porch's dim light. I wonder why I ignored those signs, why I wanted so badly to believe in her that I was willing to sacrifice the things and people that really mattered. That was a question I'd asked myself countless times, but had never dared verbalize. Why had my intelligent and sensitive son allowed himself to fall so completely under the spell of someone like Rebecca? I think I was trying to fill something, he continued, the words coming slowly, as if he were discovering the truth as he spoke. After Mom left, I always felt there was something broken in me, something that made me insufficient. And Rebecca seemed so perfect, so complete. I thought being with her would somehow complete me too. My heart tightened. All those years, all those sacrifices to protect him from the pain of abandonment. And still, it had found a way in. Michael, you were never insufficient. Never. I know that now, he said, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. Ironically, thanks to Rebecca. If she hadn't come in and turned our lives upside down, maybe I never would have confronted that fear. Never would have realized that I'm enough exactly as I am. In that moment, as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, I felt a kind of peace settle between us, an understanding that sometimes the most violent storms bring the most necessary changes. For me, the change came more gradually, but equally profound. After decades of defining my identity almost exclusively through fatherhood and sacrifice, I began rediscovering parts of myself that had been forgotten long ago. I returned to painting, a passion I'd abandoned when Michael was a baby for lack of time and resources. I started with small watercolors, then progressed to larger canvases, letting colors and shapes express what sometimes words couldn't. The first time Michael saw one of my completed paintings, he stood in the doorway of the small space I'd transformed into an improvised studio, his eyes wide. "Dad, this is incredible. I had no idea you could paint like this." "There are many things about me you don't know," I replied with a playful smile. It was true. There were parts of David the man, not just David the father, that were resurfacing after a long sleep. With Clara's encouragement, I also began participating in a support group for people who had gone through trauma or major life transitions. At first, I went just to listen, intimidated by the idea of sharing my story with strangers. But over time, I found my voice and, more importantly, found a community of people who understood what it meant to be tested to the limit and still remain standing. It was through that group that I met Teresa, a psychologist who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. After hearing my story, she made me a surprising proposal. "David, have you ever thought about using your experience to help other people? We have a mentorship program for people going through similar situations, and I think you'd be an extraordinary mentor." The idea that my pain could have a greater purpose, that it could serve to help others navigate their own storms, ignited something within me. I began training with Teresa, learning the skills necessary to support others without becoming emotionally overwhelmed. 6 months after the case ended, I gave my first formal talk to a small group of people. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped my notes, but when I began to speak, the words flowed naturally. "My name is David," I began. "And for most of my life I believed that loving meant erasing yourself, that being strong meant enduring everything in silence. I'm here to tell you I was wrong." The eyes of the people in the room, some with visible marks of their own suffering, others with more hidden wounds, were fixed on me. An instant connection formed through shared understanding. True strength isn't in how much suffering you can endure silently. It's in knowing when to raise your voice, when to set boundaries, when to say, "No, this is not acceptable." And sometimes true strength is asking for help when you need it most. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just helping those people. I was solidifying lessons I was still learning myself. That my dignity mattered as much as anyone else's. That true love never demands you make yourself smaller. That even after 50 there was still time to discover new parts of myself. Michael came to pick me up after the talk, waiting outside the room with a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers. When I came out, surrounded by people who wanted to talk more, share their own stories, I saw the pride in his eyes. "How did it go?" he asked when I finally managed to say goodbye to the group. "Transformative," I answered honestly, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. For them and for me. On the way home, we talked about the future, something that during the height of the crisis with the Ramirez had seemed like a luxury we might never have again. Michael was considering opening his own law practice focused on helping people who had been victims of financial fraud. I was thinking about going back to school, maybe taking a counseling course to complement my mentorship work. "You know what's most incredible, Dad?" Michael said as we stopped at a traffic light. "A year ago, we were both just surviving. Now we're really living." His words perfectly captured the transformation we had experienced. The crisis that was supposed to destroy us had instead forced us to grow in ways we never could have imagined. That night, sitting alone in my small improvised studio, I began a new painting. It wasn't of the storm we had faced, but of the dawn that came after. Warm colors of hope and renewal spreading across the horizon. As the brush glided across the canvas, I reflected on the journey that brought us here, on the cruel words whispered by Rebecca on the eve of the wedding that never happened. "Starting tomorrow, you're nothing but ancient history to this family." She was right, but not in the way she imagined. The tomorrow she predicted never came. Instead, a different future unfolded. One she could never have anticipated, and that I myself barely dared to dream. A future where I wasn't just extra baggage in my son's life, but a man rediscovering his own strength. where the bond between Michael and me, tested to the limit, emerged not just intact, but stronger and healthier than ever. A future where the scars we carried weren't marks of shame, but medals of survival. And as the colors mixed on the canvas before me, I felt deep gratitude for this new dawn, not just for what it was, but for the price we paid to reach it. A price that, however painful it had been, was worth every penny. 1 year has passed since I painted that first dawn. The canvas now occupies a prominent place on my living room wall, a daily reminder of how darkness always eventually yields to light. Time, that master of subtle transformations, did its healing work, not erasing the scars, but integrating them into the tapestry of our lives. Michael flourished in ways that fill my heart with pride so deep, I can sometimes barely express it. He really did open his own law practice, small but growing quickly, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud and legal manipulation. The work fills him in a way his previous job never did. Seeing him use his own pain as fuel to help others reminds me daily of the extraordinary man he became. Every case is different, he told me recently during one of our Sunday dinners, now a sacred tradition for us. But the pattern is always the same. Vulnerable people being exploited by those who should protect them. I see you in every client, Dad, and I remember why I chose this path. As for me, my own journey continued unfolding in surprising directions. The mentorship work expanded. I began giving regular talks at community centers, women's shelters, even at some local universities. My message evolved beyond my own story to address broader issues: power dynamics in relationships, signs of emotional manipulation, the importance of preserving your identity even in the closest relationships. And yes, I completed the counseling course. At 53, I was back to being a student, sitting among 20-somethings, absorbing knowledge with a thirst that only life experience can truly awaken. At first, I felt out of place, almost embarrassed to be restarting so late. But I soon discovered that my unique perspective was valued by both professors and younger colleagues. "You lived what we're just studying," a 22-year-old classmate told me after I shared some of my experience during a class discussion. That gives a completely different dimension to learning. Painting also remained in my life, a private sanctuary for days when words aren't enough. My small improvised studio expanded to occupy the spare room that once mainly held memories and dusty boxes. The walls are now a kaleidoscope of colors and emotions captured on canvas. Some dark works exploring the darker corners of my journey, others exploding with light and possibilities. 6 months ago, to my complete surprise, a small local gallery offered to exhibit some of my works in a group show about art and healing. The opening night was surreal, seeing strangers standing in front of my paintings, finding their own meanings in the colors and shapes I had poured from my soul. Michael was by my side throughout the opening, a constant and supportive presence. At one point, I noticed he had been quiet for several minutes, observing a specific painting, one I had created during the darkest days of our legal case. Deep blue and violet tones, with only a tiny point of golden light on the distant horizon. "That's how it felt, wasn't it?" he asked softly, not taking his eyes off the canvas, like we were drowning with only a fragment of hope to hold on to. I nodded, surprised by his precise perception. Yes, that's exactly how it was. He turned to me then, his eyes shining with something that looked very much like admiration. "You were always stronger than I imagined, Dad. Stronger than you yourself knew." Those words stayed with me, a balm in moments when old insecurities still try to resurface. As for the Ramirez and Rebecca, they practically disappeared from our lives. We eventually learned through mutual acquaintances that they moved to another state. Occasionally, some mention of them surfaces. Someone who met them on a business trip or an old college colleague who stayed in touch with Rebecca. Each time that happens, I feel a strange mixture of emotions, a distant echo of past pain, but also a kind of reluctant gratitude. It seems contradictory to feel anything more than bitterness toward people who tried to destroy us so methodically. But the truth is that without that devastating storm, maybe we never would have discovered the depth of our own resilience. Maybe I would still be living in the margins of my own life, defining my worth exclusively through the role of father. Maybe Michael would still be chasing a version of success that wouldn't truly fulfill him. No, I'm not grateful to them. I never could be. But I am grateful for the man I became by surviving them. About 2 months ago, something unexpected happened. Michael showed up for our Sunday dinner with a guest. Camilla, an environmental lawyer he met during a collaborative case. At first, I felt that old familiar anxiety stirring in my chest. Rebecca's ghosts lurked in the shadows of my mind, ready to remind me how easily I was discarded before. But Camilla wasn't Rebecca. That became clear in the first 5 minutes of conversation. Where Rebecca talked about herself incessantly, Camilla asked questions, genuinely interested in the answers. Where Rebecca treated me with condescension, Camilla treated me with warm respect that didn't seem forced or calculated. At one point, while serving dessert, she noticed one of my smaller paintings hanging in the hallway. "This is simply extraordinary," she said, moving closer to examine it better. "The way you captured that specific light. Did you study formally?" "Not really," I replied, a bit embarrassed by the attention. "It's more of a hobby I recently picked up again." "Well, you have a genuine gift," she said, and something in the unpretentious sincerity of her tone moved me deeply. "My mother is a curator at a gallery in Boston. She would love to see your work." After Camilla left, Michael and I washed dishes side by side, a comfortable silence between us until he finally spoke. "So, what did you think of her?" he asked, trying to sound casual but unable to completely hide the importance of my response. I considered carefully before responding. "She seems real, present, the kind of person who really sees others." Michael let out a sigh I didn't realize he was holding. "Yes, that's exactly what I feel too." "Are you serious about each other?" I asked, trying not to press too hard. "We're taking it slow," he responded, a small smile playing on his lips. "We both have our own history with complicated relationships. But yes, I think it could be something special." I felt a knot in my throat, a mixture of hope and that residual fear that maybe will never completely disappear. Michael must have seen something in my face because he put down the plate he was drying and held my wet hands in his. "Dad, I learned my lesson the hard way. I learned to see the warning signs, to value substance over appearance, to never again allow anyone to separate me from the people who truly love me." His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "And that includes you. It will always include you." That night, after Michael left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, looking at the stars. I thought about the young father I once was, holding a small child who asked when mommy would come home. I thought about all the nights I spent awake, worried if I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. If I could go back in time and talk to that younger version of myself, what would I tell him? Maybe that the sacrifices would be worth it, but that he shouldn't lose himself completely in them. That one day his son would be an extraordinary man, not despite the difficulties they faced, but partly because of them. That there would be pain, yes, so much pain, but also moments of joy so pure they would make everything worthwhile. And maybe, most importantly, I would tell him that the story doesn't end with, "and then they lived happily ever after." It ends with, "and then they kept living, growing, learning, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward, stronger together than they could ever be apart." Last week, I received an unexpected invitation. A nonprofit organization that works with people transitioning from abusive relationships asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual fundraising event. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who once felt so small, so easily disposable, now invited to share my wisdom with hundreds. I accepted, of course, and as I worked on my speech last night, I found myself returning to those words, whispered so cruelly on the eve of the wedding, that never happened. "Starting tomorrow, you're nothing but ancient history to this family." Rebecca was wrong, but not in the way I initially imagined. I'm not ancient history. I'm an ongoing story still unfolding in chapters that no one, not even I, could have foreseen. Looking to the future now, at 54, I see possibilities where I once saw only limitations. I see a son flourishing on his chosen path, perhaps building a new love based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. I see my own work touching lives in ways I never imagined being capable of. I see new dawns waiting to be painted, stories waiting to be told, wounds waiting to be transformed into wisdom. And if someone asks me how I survived the storm that almost destroyed us, I'll say this: when cruel words try to define you, when malicious hands try to mold you into something small and disposable, remember who you really are. Not just father or son or any other singular role the world tries to reduce you to. You are a universe of possibilities. You are a story yet to be written. You are bigger than any definition others try to impose on you. And when someone tries to convince you otherwise, when they whisper that starting tomorrow you're no longer part of the family, that your value has been exhausted, that your place at the table no longer exists, remember this: true belonging never depends on someone else's permission. True family isn't defined by prenups or financial interests. And your story, well, your story belongs only to you. It was that truth that saved Michael and me in our darkest moment. It was that truth that allowed us to emerge not just as survivors, but as transformed beings. And it's that truth I carry with me now, a beacon to illuminate not just my own path, but perhaps also the path of others who are still struggling to find their light. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see just the exhausted single father who sacrificed everything, nor the man discarded with cruel words whispered on a summer night. I see David, complete, complex, still evolving. A man who, after spending most of his life caring for others, finally learned to care for himself too. And that, perhaps, is the sweetest victory of all. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click on the next video that appears on the screen, because in it you'll find a story of betrayal and upheaval like you've never seen before.